Hello and welcome to this first webinar on the Anatomy and Physiology for Exercise module at level 2. And in case you weren't aware, this module is assessed through a multiple choice exam paper, and the whole idea of these webinars and this online training is to improve your knowledge so that when you come to take the paper you'll have the required skill set to be able to get the pass mark. And we're going to be looking at a whole host of things, including the bones, the joints, muscles, the nervous system, and as we work through, you should find that your knowledge improves very, very quickly. If there are any questions, as always, you can let us know, just give us a call, or alternatively send us over an email to your tutor. And finally, what I would say is when you're working through these modules, please make sure that you've got a pen and paper next to you to make any important notes. Remember the key bits of learning. And if you want to, and one of the big benefits of having the online training is that you can rewind and you can rewatch whenever you need to. So if something doesn't make sense, pop it on rewind, play it back through, have a look, and you'll be all the wiser for doing that. So without further ado, let's get started. And today we're going to be looking at the structure and function of the skeletal system. And in particular, when we finish this module, if you've watched it all and understood what I've been talking about, you should be able to describe the basic functions of the skeleton. You should be able to identify structures of the axial and appendicular skeleton. We should know how to classify bones in the body and look at them and sort of say, oh, this bone falls under this classification and this bone falls under this classification, and you should be able to say why that happens. You should know the structure of a long bone, and we should be able to explain the stages of bone growth and how that happens in the body. And finally, we should know about the postural deviations that can happen, in particular in the spine, and really sort of getting down to some detail. What happens if someone's obese or carrying a baby? How can that affect the structure of the spine? So let's get started. And first up, we're going to look at the structure of the skeleton. And inside the skeleton, as you all know, we've got bones. And what we've also got is something called cartilage. Alright? And cartilage can be found in 3 different areas, and there are 3 different types of cartilage. We have hyaline, fibro, and elastic, okay? And hyaline cartilage can be found on the ends of our bones, inside the joints. And the purpose of that hyaline cartilage is to stop any friction within the bones, alright? It stops the bones rubbing together with each other. It's like a little thin layer of maybe plastic or rubber on the end of something that stops it causing friction and rubbing with something else. And that's the best way that I can describe hyaline cartilage with you. But you need to remember that it's in the joints and it stops that friction from happening. Fibrocartilage, we find that particularly in the spine, and it gives us a certain degree of flexibility, but we haven't got sort of free movement like we would in a muscle. So if you imagine your spine, you can slightly bend your spine, but you can't bend it too far. Not like the shoulder joint. If you imagine the shoulder, you can roll it all the way around, you can do circles. With fibrocartilage, where that is in the body, it's only slightly flexible. Helps to keep things secure, and it gives us a certain degree of movement. We also have elastic cartilage, and elastic cartilage is used to hold things in place, to give them form and structure, but it is like elastic. So if you imagine screwing up your ear and then letting it go again, it's going to bounce back into shape, and that's what elastic cartilage does, and that's what that's there for. We have the bones, and the bones meet in the body to form joints, okay, and we'll look a little bit more in depth in the bones a little bit later on. And we also have ligaments and tendons, and what's important is not to get the ligaments and tendons confused with each other. Ligaments connect bone to bone, and they're predominantly found around the joints. So wherever we have a joint where 2 bones meet, we'll also have a ligament to keep that joint secure and to make sure it's not floppy and going all over the place. We have tendons, And what tendons do, they attach muscle to bone, and they mean that we can transfer force through the skeleton. So if you imagine your bicep contracting, the tendon is then connected to the bone and pulls it into the right place. Okay, when that movement happens, when that contraction happens in the muscle, the connection to the skeleton is made through the tendon. And it's important to remember that ligaments and tendons aren't the same thing. They might seem very similar, but they're not quite the same thing. So let's have a look at the functions of the skeleton in a little bit more depth. So we know that the skeleton is a framework, alright? There's lots of different bones in the body, they go all over the place, and bones are pretty much in every part of the body. And the bones have more than one purpose. Firstly is to protect the vital organs, so look after us and keep us safe. Their second function is to provide surfaces for muscle attachment. So as we talked about just, through the form of a tendon, the skeleton provides somewhere for muscles to attach onto, which then means that we can generate movement. The bones are also responsible for the production of red and white blood cells, and they can also store minerals such as calcium. And as we've touched on, they are there for protection, and it's important for you to know which areas of the body or which bones in the body are responsible for protecting what. So the rib cage, if we look at the location of the rib cage, behind the rib cage are all of our vital organs. So things like our liver, our heart, our lungs, our kidneys, our bladder, our intestines, they're all behind the rib cage. And the rib cage's job is to protect those organs and make sure that they don't sort of get any impacts. No blows can get in there and hurt our really, really important vital organs that are essential for us to survive as human beings. We then have the cranium or skull, and probably don't need to tell you this, but inside the skull we have the brain, and the purpose of the cranium and the skull is to protect the brain, make sure it doesn't get knocked around, and make sure that it doesn't get damaged. We then have the vertebral column, alright? The vertebral column is our spine. And inside the spine, alright, what we have is a big long column of nerves, okay? And our vertebral column looks after our nerves in there, the proper name being the spinal cord, okay? So the vertebral column and the bones in our spine, they look after the nerves that travel from the brain all around the body, sort of passing on signals and messages and telling us what to do and when to move and how to move. That's what the vertebral column does. We then have the pelvis, alright? Think about the location of the pelvis, and what the pelvis does is it protects our reproductive organs. So easiest way that I like to think about this is that if we were a caveman, if we went back in time, the skeleton protects all the things that are essential for human life, alright? Ribcage protects all of those vital internal organs that we need to survive. Cranium looks after the brain, okay? We can't do anything without the brain. A vertebral column looks after the spinal cord. We need the spinal cord to be able to function, to be able to move, to get around. And the pelvis protects the reproductive organs. Obviously, if we can't reproduce, we can't carry on the race, and we can't survive as human beings. And that's what the skeleton protects. Following on from that quite nicely, we have the axial skeleton and we have the appendicular skeleton, okay? And now the axial skeleton is the bit in white on the diagram, and it's the bits that are really close to the middle and really central. And what they do is they look after all those important things. So the things that make up the axial skeleton are the skull, the rib cage and the spine, the bits that look after those really, really important essential areas, and their job is really to protect. Those bones are all about protecting. We then have the appendicular spine, which is the bit that's highlighted in red, and the appendicular spine is all about creating movement and giving us ways to anchor and leverage, alright? And that's what the red bits do. They allow us to do that. So again, going back to that metaphor with the caveman, the axial skeleton, all about the protection, looking after those vital organs, keeping us safe. Appendicular, that allows us to generate movement. It's the bits that are further away from the centre, arms, legs, shoulders, hands, feet, and that's what the appendicular skeleton is. So what we're going to look at now, alright, is we're going to try and look at classifying some of these bones. So how can we classify the bones? And what we do is we look at the bone's shape, alright? No matter how big a bone is or how small it is, we classify it by its shape. And it doesn't matter if it's the biggest bone in the body, which is the humerus, or it could be the smallest bone in the body. It doesn't matter, alright? And we've got 5 different classifications for those bones. We've got long, short, flat, irregular, and sesamoid. And what I'm going to do on the next slide is I'm going to take you through where we can find some of those bones. So, long bones first of all. Long bones are what we would stereotypically imagine maybe if we saw a cartoon and there was a dog with his bone in his mouth. That's what a long bone looks like. It's very thin in the middle and it has 2 ball-like bits on each end, okay? It's what we all imagine a bone to look like. And examples of that are the humerus in the thigh. We have the tibia and fibia in the lower leg. We have the humerus, which we can find in the upper arm where the bicep is. We also have the ulna and the radius, which make up the lower arm, alright? And they're predominant examples of a long bone. Short bones. Short bones are, as it says, they are short, especially in comparison to a long bone. They're normally very, very small. And the best example is the carpals, alright? So they're the bones in our hand or in our feet as well. They are small bones, and that's the way we classify them. They are very, very, very small. We also have something called flat bones, alright? Flat bones are characteristic by their flatness, and if we were to put them on the table, they would lie flat like a piece of paper, for example. You wouldn't be able to roll them round. They'd lie flat. You could slide them, but they'd lie flat on the table. And examples of flat bones are the frontal bone, which is the bone in your forehead. And then also another really popular one is the scapula. And the common name for the scapula is our shoulder blade. That's a flat bone as well. We then have the irregular bones, alright? And irregular bones are called irregular bones because they are a little bit irregular. They're a little bit all over the place. They're pointy, they're spiky, they haven't got an exact shape. You might struggle to describe it. And the predominant example of that is the vertebra. As you can see on the picture here, if we look over on the right, I'm just going to try and find the cursor. Here we go. Look at how irregular that bone is. It's poking out all over the place. That's an irregular bone. And finally, number 5, we have the sesamoid bones, okay? Sesamoid means seed, okay? And therefore, sesamoid bones are bones that look like seeds. And really, the example that you're going to see at level 2, alright, is that a sesamoid bone is the patella, okay? Other name for the patella is the kneecap, alright? So the kneecap is a seed-like bone just on top of the knee, and that's how we classify that bone. So there's 5 different classifications: long, short, flat, irregular, and sesamoid. And you need to know which bones can be classed as which. To reinforce that, we've got a little bit of a quiz. So the spinal vertebrae is an irregular bone. The tibia in the lower leg, that's a long bone. Carpals are short. The phalanges are the bones that make up our fingers. They are short bones as well. We also have the scapula, which is a flat bone in our shoulder blade. And sesamoid. Sesamoid is the kneecap, or to give it its correct name, the patella. And in particular, we need to know all about the long bones. Okay, long bones are I wouldn't say they're the most common, but as fitness professionals, long bones are very important because they're where all the movement takes place. And when we're looking at a long bone, it has 2 distinct areas. At each end, the ball-like bits, to give them their correct name, they are called the epiphyse. Alright, epiphyse. That's where they are. They're at the end of each bone. In the middle section, where the bally bits aren't, that's the diaphysis. And you need to know, if someone refers to one of those terms, which area of the bone are they talking about? Diaphysis in the middle, epiphysis is on each end of the bone. And at the end, where we've got the epiphyse, we've also got the cartilage, which we mentioned earlier, making sure that there's no friction during the joint and during movement. And we also have the epiphyseal growth plate. And the growth plate is where growth occurs, which we'll look at on the next slide. But it's important to know at the ends of the bones, if we went down the page and looked at the diagram a little bit more, the ends of the bones are spongy. They're not quite as developed, they're not quite as hard as a diaphysis. Diaphysis is hard, it's fully developed, it's fully grown, it's hard and strong. Outer bits are a bit more spongy, alright? And that's where growth takes place. Because they're constantly getting broken down and built back up again, they're a bit more spongy, those bits at the end. Also need to be aware, if you look at this cross section at the bottom, alright, the bone's hollow in the middle. It's not solid all the way through like you might have thought. There's a big cavity in the middle. And that cavity is where we keep our bone marrow. It's where the production of blood cells takes place. It's where we store minerals. And that's where that happens. And that cavity is called the medullary cavity. That's the name for the big hole in the middle of these long bones. So be aware, diaphysis, epiphysis on each end. We have the growth plate and we have the cartilage on the end of the bone. And this bone is hollow. It has the medullary cavity in the middle, and that's where all of that that production of the red and white blood cells goes on. So how exactly does the bone grow? Well, we have two different organisms that we need to be aware of. We have osteoblasts and we have osteoclasts, okay? Osteoblasts are responsible for building new bone tissue, alright? They will go in and they will form new bone. However, what they can't do is they can't clear away the old bone. That job comes down to the osteoclasts. And the osteoclasts are responsible for moving away that old bone. And there's an easy way to remember what does what, okay? Osteoblasts, which starts for a B, stands for build. So osteoblasts build. Osteoclasts, which starts with a C, clear. Blasts build, clasts clear. And that's how you can remember what does what in terms of when we're looking at the organisms and the systems within the body that build our bone. Factors affecting bone formation. So we need to be aware as fitness professionals how to make people's bones stronger. And nutrition and diet will play a part. So will exposure to sunlight. So if you ever imagine someone like a prisoner of war who spent many years indoors, no sunlight, locked inside, not moving around very much, they have not got the correct nutrition and diet or the correct exposure to sunlight for their bones to grow. And therefore those type of people, or people who've ever been through that circumstance, will start to develop problems with their bones because they don't have the right things in place in order for them to grow properly. We've then got hormonal secretion. So as we grow, and especially when we hit puberty, hormones will be released into the body and the bones will start to grow at an increased rate. I'm sure we've all seen that with friends or family or whatever it might be. So the hormones can also affect the way that the bones grow. And then we've also got physical activity and exercise. And what's important for us to know when we're going out there in gyms and working with our clients is that when we do physical activity, it makes the bones stronger. In particular, if you're doing any resistance type activities, so stuff that involves using weights, maybe using resistance machines, that makes our bones stronger. Running will also do that because there's a big impact in our feet and our ankles, and that will make the bones stronger. One last thing to cover off here with the bottom of the page. We've got the medical condition caused by a loss of calcium and reduced bone density, alright? And that medical condition is something called osteoporosis. And osteoporosis is something that happens particularly in women. It can happen with men, but in particular with women. As they get older, the bones don't grow in the same way. They don't have as much calcium in there anymore. And the bones become weak and brittle. And that condition there is called osteoporosis. Okay, so let's have a look at the spine. So we're getting towards the bottom of those learning objectives that we identified at the start of the session now. And as you can see, on the left, when you're a fetus in the womb, the spine is curved, like a little bit like a shallow letter C. As we grow, it becomes a lot straighter, and it has curves in different places. It has some concave curves and some hollow curves, okay? Let's look at that in a bit more detail. So, we have the concave or hollow curves, and then we have the convex or rounded curves. So there's two rounded curves, and there's two concave curves. So you can see where the spine curves in, that's concave, and where it curves out, that's convex. Alright, so just be aware, 4 curves in total, and where they take place. And then we've also got the different regions of the spine that we need to be aware of. We have the cervical, thoracic, lumbar, sacrum, and coccyx. And I'm just reading that going down the page there on the blue. The cervical is really our neck and the bones in our neck, where it takes the spinal cord all the way up to connect with the brain. And we have 7 vertebrae in there, so 7 bones that make up the cervical region. We then have the thoracic region. Thoracic region is our upper back, pretty much level with our lats, our latissimus dorsi, and there are 12, alright? That area of the spine has got the most vertebrae in it. We then have the lumbar region. Lumbar region is our lower back. Lower back has 5 vertebrae, but they are very big, very strong vertebrae in there, and we don't sort of really want problems going on in there because they can cause lots of difficulty with walking, getting around, sitting down, standing up, lying down. Very problematic. So as fitness professionals, we need to look after the whole spine, in particular the lumbar region. If we're doing things like deadlifts and bent over rows, that region can come in for some real stick and some real punishment, so we need to be careful with that. At the bottom, we then have the sacrum and the coccyx. The coccyx is what used to be our tail when we were back sort of as cavemen all those years ago. That was where our tail would have been. And then we went just above that, we have our sacrum, and there are 5 vertebrae in the sacral region, and there are 4 down by the coccyx. Okay, you need to be aware of how many are in each area and what each area is called. And as we've touched on a little bit there, as people exercise or even through daily life, we can get curvatures of the spine or spinal deviations as they're known. And on the left, we can see a normal spine and what that looks like. And then next to that, we've got something called hyperlordosis. So hyperlordosis affects the lower back, it affects the lumbar region that we've just been talking about. And as you can see, that lower part of the spine is really pushed towards the tummy, and that's what hyperlordosis is. It's when that lower region is pushed out towards the tummy. And the type of thing that can cause that is being obese, maybe. If you're carrying a big weight in your stomach, it's going to pull that lower back forward. Also, I'm not comparing obesity with pregnancy, but if someone is pregnant, they're carrying around an increased weight in their tummy, and that also can pull that spine forward. And that's what causes lordosis. Could also be caused by some activities in the gym. So if you've got incorrect technique on something like a bent over row, for example, you could be putting undue stress on that lumbar region and causing some lordosis there. We then have kyphosis. The best way for me to describe kyphosis is someone who's got a hunchback. Something like the very stereotypical example would be the Hunchback of Notre Dame. That's someone who's got kyphosis. It's when you've got real rounded shoulders and your neck sort of appears to be non-existent or very low down. That's kyphosis, when the spine's bent at the top through the thoracic region. And type of people or type of athletes that can get kyphosis, if you imagine a cyclist being hunched up over those handlebars for long periods of time, they're prone to getting to being kyphotic or to developing kyphosis, alright? And also, if you think about someone who works in an office all day, leaning over a computer or a laptop, hunched up with their shoulders, they're likely to get kyphosis as well. So as fitness professionals, we need to be aware of these conditions and how they come about. Scoliosis. So scoliosis is seen from the back, and scoliosis is a bend in the spine towards the left and the right. And this again is normally caused by human behaviour. In particular, if you sit at a difficult angle at a desk for a long period of time, if you sleep with a rotation in your body, that can cause scoliosis. And scoliosis is that bend to either the left or the right, normally through the thoracic region. As we know, it's just sort of up level with our lats there, and you can see the rib cage as well there on the diagram. We've covered that off. I'm going to carry on. we're going to look at why it's important for you to have this knowledge of the skeleton. Really, I think most important is the blue, posture, alignment and exercise. If you're working as a fitness professional, it's your job to help make people better, to help make them more healthy. And if you can correct someone's posture, that's a very specialist thing, and it's probably something that you do at level 3 more than level 2. But if you have an awareness of posture and bad posture and how it can be corrected, that's a very, very powerful thing, because you can go and you can find clients and you can talk to them about their posture and you can give them an almost immediate solution. You know, if you're going to help someone to lose 5 stone, that's going to take a long time. It's going to take lots of hard work. If you can correct someone's posture and give them some exercise and help them to feel better, you're a more well-rounded, more effective fitness professional. It's also important because we need to know the effects of exercise on the skeleton, and we also need to know how to improve bone density, particularly if we're working with elderly people. We want them to be strong, we want them to be healthy, and we need to know what type of activity is going to encourage that reaction in the body. I hope you've enjoyed watching, guys. Just to look through the assessment criteria before we finish. Should now know the basic functions of the skeleton. We should be able to identify the structures of the axial and appendicular. Remember which is central, which is outside, which is further away from the body, and you know, the axial looks after all those important organs. Appendicular helps us create movement and leverage. Explain the classifications. So remember the different classifications, there's 5 of them in total, and which bones fall under those classifications. We know about the structure of a long bone and the different areas that make up that bone, and we're also able to talk about bone growth, osteoblasts, osteoclasts, and we can look at the spine, recognise postural defects, and also what can cause those to happen. Hope you've enjoyed watching. As I said at the start, if you need anything, please contact your tutor or give us a call on the office line. And the next instalment, the next webinar that you need to watch is on the joints. All right, level 2 on the joints. Check that out next, and I'll see you there.